The scream came from the garden just as the iron gates were closing, sharp and terrified, cutting through the calm of the billionaire's mansion like shattered glass. In that single moment, everything that seemed permanent, wealth, power, security, collapsed into chaos. A child's life hung by a breath, and the only person close enough to act was the woman no one ever noticed, the maid who quietly cleaned floors and carried secrets heavier than any burden. What she did next saved a life, but what she carried inside her heart would later destroy another. If you believe that kindness can change destinies and that everyone deserves a second chance, take a moment right now to like this video, share it with someone who believes in humanity, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps keep stories like this alive. The maid's name was Sarah, and for 7 years she had worked inside the sprawling estate of Alexander Blackwood, one of the richest men in the country. The mansion was famous for its marble halls, private gardens, and silence that money bought. Sarah blended into that silence, moving softly from room to room, her head lowered, her presence barely registered by the people who lived there. To them, she was just another uniform, another shadow. But every morning, before the sun rose, she stood at the edge of the servants' quarters, pressing a hand to her chest, as if steadying a heart that carried more history than anyone could imagine. Alexander Blackwood's world revolved around control. He controlled markets, companies, and headlines, but the one thing he held closest was his son, Ethan. The boy was 9 years old, curious, kind, and painfully lonely. His mother had died years earlier, and Alexander had buried his grief under contracts and power. Ethan spent most of his days wandering the mansion's gardens with a book in his hand, watched by security cameras more than people. Sarah noticed him in the small ways others didn't. She noticed how he lingered near the kitchen just to hear voices, how his eyes followed laughter like it was something rare and precious. On that afternoon, the mansion was preparing for a charity gala. Staff rushed around, guards changed shifts, and distractions created gaps no one expected. Sarah had been sent to clean the west wing, far from the main entrance, when she heard the scream. It wasn't loud at first, but it carried a fear that made her blood turn cold. She dropped everything and ran toward the sound, her shoes slipping on the polished stone path leading into the garden. What she saw froze her breath. A man dressed as a delivery worker had grabbed Ethan near the hedges, one hand over the child's mouth, the other pulling him toward a hidden gate. The guards were too far, the cameras pointed elsewhere, and time was bleeding away. Sarah didn't think. She acted. She screamed louder than she ever had in her life, a raw, desperate sound that ripped through the air. She threw herself forward, grabbing the kidnapper's arm, biting and clawing with a strength born from terror and love. The man panicked, shoving her hard to the ground, but her scream had already done its damage. Security came running. The kidnapper fled, disappearing through the trees, leaving Ethan crying and shaking. Sarah pulled the boy into her arms, holding him as if letting go would end the world. Her hands trembled as she checked his face, his arms, his breath. When the guards arrived, they found a maid on her knees, dirt on her uniform, blood on her lip, and a billionaire's son alive because she had refused to be invisible. The story exploded across the estate within minutes. Alexander arrived in the garden pale and furious, his controlled world shattered. When he saw Ethan safe, clinging to Sarah, something in his eyes broke open. For the first time in years, fear overpowered power. Sarah tried to step back, to return the child to his father, but Ethan wouldn't let go. He buried his face into her shoulder, sobbing in a way that spoke of how close he had come to disappearing forever. That night, Sarah was called into Alexander's private office. The room was vast and cold, lined with glass and steel, overlooking the city he ruled. Alexander thanked her, his voice heavy, and promised anything she wanted. Money, security, a future. Sarah stood there silently, her hands folded, her eyes lowered. She told him she didn't want anything, she only wanted to keep her job. Something about her refusal unsettled him, but grief and gratitude silenced his questions. In the weeks that followed, everything changed. Ethan began seeking Sarah out, asking for her presence during meals, walks, even bedtime stories read from a distance. Alexander allowed it at first out of gratitude, then out of confusion. His son laughed more, he smiled more, and every time Sarah watched Ethan, her heart twisted tighter, the secret she carried growing heavier with every passing day. Sarah's nights were sleepless. She sat on her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying memories she had buried long ago. Years before, she had been young, in love, and abandoned. Pregnant and terrified, she had been forced to give up her baby after a tragic accident, and a cruel decision made by powerful people who wanted the problem erased. She had been told the child was gone forever. That child was Ethan. The truth was a wound that never healed. Sarah had taken the job at the mansion without knowing. When she first saw Ethan years earlier, something inside her had screamed recognition. His eyes, his smile, the way he tilted his head when thinking. She had denied it, pushed it down, convinced herself grief was playing tricks. But after the kidnapping, after holding him in her arms, the truth became impossible to ignore. Alexander, meanwhile, began noticing Sarah in ways he never had. He watched how she cared for Ethan, how the boy trusted her without hesitation. He ordered background checks not out of suspicion but curiosity. What came back made his world tilt. Dates, hospitals, sealed records, a trail of decisions he had once signed without thought. A past mistake, buried under wealth and legal power, rose like a ghost. The night he confronted Sarah was silent and suffocating. He asked her about her past, about the child she had lost. Sarah didn't deny it. She told him everything, not with anger, but with exhaustion and truth. She spoke of being powerless, of loving a child she was never allowed to hold, of choosing to stay near rather than disappear completely. Each word struck Alexander harder than any accusation could have. The realization shattered him. The maid who saved his son wasn't just a hero. She was the mother he had erased from his life to protect his image and control. The truth stripped away his wealth's armor and left him exposed to the weight of his choices. He saw the years stolen, the love denied, the loneliness he had unknowingly forced upon his own child. For days, the mansion felt like a tomb. Ethan sensed the tension, confused and afraid of losing the one person who made him feel safe. Sarah considered leaving, believing her presence now only caused pain, but Alexander stopped her. He was no longer the untouchable billionaire. He was a broken man facing the consequences of his past. Rebuilding was slow and painful. There was no dramatic forgiveness, no instant healing. There were tears, long silences, and nights where guilt kept Alexander awake. But there was also change. He stepped back from work, sat with his son, learned how to listen. He allowed Sarah space not as a servant, but as a mother finding her place in a life that had been stolen from her. Ethan, unaware of all the details, only knew that the world felt warmer. The woman who saved him stayed. His father smiled more. The mansion echoed with something unfamiliar but desperately needed: hope. Before this story ends, I want to ask you something special. Please comment the word kindness if you believe that one brave act can change lives forever. Your comments mean more than you know. Years later, people would speak of the kidnapping as a miracle narrowly avoided. Few knew the deeper truth that the real rescue wasn't just from a kidnapper but from a past built on fear and control. Sarah never asked for recognition. She only wanted what she had always wanted, to protect her child. Alexander never fully forgave himself, but he learned that true power wasn't in money or influence, but in humility and responsibility. If this story touched your heart, if it made you feel something real, please like the video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps bring stories of humanity pain, and second chances to light. In the end, the truth did shatter his world, but from the broken pieces, something more honest and human was built, and sometimes that is the only way a life truly begins.